All right, good afternoon. I'm Senator Julia Curd. I'm the Senate Minority Leader. We come today because we have to say something about the Supreme Court ruling that relates to the Voting Rights Act and how that's going to affect the state and everyone in our state. I'm deeply concerned because we're already seeing a response by states to begin diluting black votes. We've got to make sure that any of these calls for redistricting are fair. We know that there's explicitly political goals happening and that they're rigging the rules to dilute votes. Deeply concerned about rolling back the Voting Rights Act and how that's going to affect people's votes, no matter who they are. We cannot ignore the history, the reason for the Voting Rights Act, and the history that led to its implementation and the challenges since then to get it implemented right. It's incredibly frustrating and heartbreaking to go backwards like we are. And I think our country, although we know this is horrible, that our country has faced incredibly difficult times. We have seen courageous and brilliant people pull us together and move us forward. This ruling is unacceptable, but we know that we can't let it stand, and that we stand with communities of color, and we stand for fairness against this injustice. With that, I'm going to hand off to Senator Nikki Nice.
I didn't know I was going first. I'll say a couple comments, and then I may come back and say some more. But I think it is very important for us to understand the timeline of representation for African Americans within the state of Oklahoma. During the late 1890s, when we had Green Curran as our first person to represent Kingfisher County, his first act of legislation was something with dealing with civil rights. And one of his friends who had been clubbed by some Caucasian people within that same community. And he came to this body and asked us to support civil rights in that aspect, and it fell by one vote. So that speaks to some of the things that we know as far as representation for African Americans within the state of Oklahoma. Unfortunately, he didn't run again, but it wasn't until after statehood that we did receive a A.C. Hamlin within our history as far as African Americans then being elected to the state of Oklahoma. But because of grandfather clauses, because of all of the things that we have seen take place within Oklahoma, it prevented him from being able to run again and to be reelected in the state of Oklahoma. And as you look at the timeline, it took many years, many decades, until the 1960s for us to have representation within the Senate by Senator E. Melvin Porter. And I say his name because of the ways that he had to help fight on the local level for us to have representation as a city council body. When the wards expanded to 8, because of the vote in the mid-1960s, there were calls from our community for representation because we knew we needed to be at the table to make sure we were a part of the process when it came to policymaking. And had it not been for Clara Luper, had it not been for her calling upon the help of Senator, then Attorney E. Melvin Porter, had it not been for them calling upon all of the names from our community who needed to be at the table, our clergy, all of those who said we need representation, we would not have had a Dr. Charles Atkins to be appointed to Ward 7 for Oklahoma City. So I understand the impact of what is taking place when we look at majority-minority districts, when we look at how our communities have had the opportunity to be at the table because of one seat. One seat means everything to our city. One seat right now means everything for our state. We only have 2 seats, excuse me, that represent the Senate level for African Americans, and I don't believe that number has changed since 1965, and that's the unfortunate part of even having this conversation. We haven't had to move the needle, but we've had to make sure that we've had representation for our community. So I'm very distraught by the decision of our Supreme Court, and I would say we have to listen to Black women because Sister Anita Hill told us what was about to take place with the appointment of a Clarence Thomas. And Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice, has benefited on the backs of a Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. And I know my ancestor, Thurgood Marshall, is turning over and over and over because he cannot rest because of his successor undoing the things that he, as an attorney, fought for our country when it comes to Board of Education, when it comes to the representation for even Ada Lois Scipio Fisher and being on the boots on the ground in the state of Oklahoma. So I am very concerned. I do hope that we are able to do the work that needs to be done to make sure we are getting more people registered to vote within our community, more people registered to vote within our state, and to ensure, again, that our representation doesn't diminish, but it flourishes. Because we know that those few voices that we have right now currently serving in our Oklahoma Legislative Black Caucus, it's 6 of us out of 151.
49.
Thank you, 149. That's disappointing to have 6 people that represent this whole body in the state. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I apologize for my lengthy response, but that history needed to be said for us to understand where we are and where we need to go. Oh.
Yeah, you want to?
And I would like to introduce my colleague, who is also my mentor in helping me understand a lot of these policies and how they have been implemented in a not so positive way for our communities, but what we can do further. Senator Regina Goodwin.
Senator Nice, thank you. It is unfortunate that we have to gather today to acknowledge the backwards progress and the unfortunate trajectory, which is none, as relates to all people being represented and all people having a voice. I do want to say, as we talk about the history in Oklahoma, it was my Uncle Jim Goodwin, who's an attorney, and amazingly, he was a party plaintiff with Jim Inhofe at the time, and they worked to provide for fair representation in Oklahoma in a lawsuit. And I grew up understanding how we got this reapportionment. I grew up understanding that if all folks don't have a voice, what is the point of having a United States? And what is united about a Supreme Court that will reverse Voting Rights Act, not only Section 5, but Section 2. And that literally said you cannot and should not be abridging anybody's right to vote based on race or color. It's as simple as it could be. For us to have a president now in Trump who rejoiced at that decision, and he literally said, this will be good for Republicans. And this is beyond Republican. This is beyond Democrat. This is about human beings. This is about our right to be represented. It is about our right to have districts that reflect the best of America. And I think our Senate, if you just look at the complexity and the complexion of our Senate members, we more represent America. And that involves all races, all ethnicities, and we relish that and we embrace that. I also know that if you have to go back and look at the timeline, when there was a time when black folks, it was illegal for us to vote. Black folks were considered, who were enslaved, 3/5 human. We are fully human, and we fully deserve the right to vote and to participate in this thing we called, this experiment, I'd say, that we call America. Those are my thoughts. I think that for anybody to think that this is just another day at the office, there is a reason why we had the Edmund Pettus Bridge. There is a reason why they called it Bloody Sunday. There is a reason why there was a Martin Luther King and a Rosa Parks and a John Lewis and so many folks on the local level that also participated in those marches that said, you may beat us, you may berate us, but you should not in any way deny our humanity. And you shouldn't be beating us, you shouldn't be berating us, but when it comes to participation, when it comes to representation, we are all Americans, we are all human. And I think it's been well said that there is power in resistance. There is absolute power in resistance. And when you come to a place today where you have Tennessee and Louisiana, Texas, even Oklahoma, which will be spoken to, that has rigged maps and gerrymandered areas that have silenced the voice of so many people, that we need to understand this goes beyond Oklahoma. It goes beyond any one state, Texas. This affects our democracy. And in a day right now when, quite frankly, autocracy is having its way amidst this experiment called democracy, everybody, I don't care what your race, should be alarmed, because we are all affected when everyone cannot have a voice. So I'm just going to leave it at that and say that we have to resist. We have to speak up when we know that injustice is having its way, and particularly when we have leadership in President Trump, who rejoices in a day when racism is magnified. Thank you.
All right. Well, so it's my turn. And so my name is Michael Brooks Jimenez, and I represent Senate District 44, which is the south side of Oklahoma City. And so that's the place where I was born and raised. And always a member and always involved in the Latino community. And so after being able to serve for a period of time working as an attorney doing immigration work, I decided that I wanted to be able to make a change out here at the Capitol. And so I decided to run for office. And so now I've been in office for 9 years. And so within that first year, we had hit redistricting. And being the new guy here, I got designated to be able to be the Democratic lead on the Senate redistricting committee. And so being able to work in a collegial and a collegial way with the colleagues, we were able to make sure that no candidate or no incumbent got drawn out of his district. And at the same time, we were also able to create the very first majority Latino Senate district here in the state of Oklahoma. And so for the past 9 years, I've been telling people that hopefully one of the goals that I've always had is that if I could crack this door open a little bit by being able to get elected, that perhaps my one true goal as far as a legacy would be to see more Latino elected officials than when I started. And so during this period of time, we've been able to get 2 additional Latinos elected. We've been able to start a caucus, and so we're lagging a little bit behind the African American community, but we've been able to, I think, be able to provide a valuable voice here at the Capitol. And so we're getting ready for Hispanic Heritage Day, which is next week on the 13th. We've been able to do Latino youth summits where all kids are welcome to be able to come up here to the Capitol. And I think our voice is important. And more importantly, I think our voice is essential. And so while it breaks my heart as an attorney to be able to see the Supreme Court ignore years and years of precedent when there's supposed to be a conservative court that respects precedent, to be able to have an activist court do this, I think it lessens our bodies to be able to adequately represent the people in the state of Oklahoma. And so for that reason, I'm sad today that this is happening, and I am committed to trying to see what we can do to be able to ensure that we have a variety of voices here at the Capitol, because I think it makes us all better.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I just want to say explicitly that, I also was involved with redistricting last cycle, and I heard last week some threads where people thought, well, this isn't going to really affect our state. And I'll just say that is not true. Last cycle, I sat while they drew the maps. And I know that federal law and the court cases that had created protections for our districts that are primarily Black and hopefully primarily Latino to make sure there's representation in office, those were protected because of federal law and because of that case law and that concern by our colleagues that they didn't want to run afoul of case law. They didn't want to show up in court. They didn't want to be deposed about their maps. And they took great pride in making those maps bipartisan and by not getting them challenged in court. Unfortunately, that is what is being undermined through this change in case law. And so we're all going to have to be more vigilant about the types of representation we have. We're talking about the city level, the school board level, county, and up. All those districts are under consideration at least every 10 years, if not sooner. That affects our power and our voice. And so we need to stand up and make sure that we're fighting against this injustice. My Black and Latino colleagues' work and perspective is absolutely necessary in this building. They constantly bring important voices, important perspectives that might not get heard, even if we're trying to represent everyone. We need them in office. And so I think we all have to put in that extra effort to stand for fairness and for change when it comes to making sure that the Voting Rights Act is respected and that moving forward we're truly reducing barriers to voting, increasing the power of minority voices in this state. With that, more comments are open to questions. You want to say one more thing? Okay.
One more thing, and then I'm done. I do want to mention, I heard just the comments on the state level of redistricting, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that process as a local elected official. When I was on the city council, it was brought to my attention why we had those maps for our city in our communities because of that same federal law. So I watched as they had to go around to ensure that we had a majority minority district for representation for our city, the city of Oklahoma City, all 621 square miles of our city. So for them to be very thoughtful and intentional to ensure that that happened in 2020, I am very concerned about what will happen in 2030 with that protection no longer being coveted over our communities and our city to ensure that we have a majority minority district. And I know I've seen some of the comments. People want to talk about identity politics. This is not what that's about, but it is about making sure we have all voices, all like-minded folks, and some not like-minded, but just ensuring that we have diversity at the table, making sure all people are represented within our communities and all across our state and our nation. So it's not about that, but at the same time, representation does matter. And with that, we'll take questions.
Perfect. Any questions?
Is there a concern that a redistricting effort could be taken up as soon as the next legislative session instead of waiting for 2030?
Are you talking about for the state legislature? I mean, I hope not. I hope we're not going to see an effort towards redistricting. I think, given the fact that there's only 8 Democratic seats out of the whole legislature, I don't think that's a top priority. I think I seem to be really on Congress. But I think we'll be vigilant about that. It's incredibly important to us that urban voices are represented. That's also a concern in redistricting. I mean, I think that process is coming right up. It's going to be here in only 4 years. So I think we got to be vigilant now whether it's going to come up next year or not. I have not heard that from anyone, but it'd be hard to minimize us more at this point. Yes, please.
I would like to add that just a few short years ago, we watched what happened to CD5. And the number of folks, some 180,000 or so, and a good portion of those folks were Hispanic, and how they were, the maps were rigged, quite frankly. And at one time, we had a Democratic voice at the congressional level. And that move was made to ensure that we would have the Republican representation that we have now in Congress. So I think Oklahoma was ahead of the curve. I think they did some things before Texas did, like in 2021. So let's be mindful that efforts have been underway, and this just didn't happen overnight. Justice Roberts, when he was a young attorney with the Reagan administration, his goal, and he spoke to it, was to do something in terms of eradicating Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so he's finally, after all of these decades, has completed his mission.
Yeah, and we have case law that has now said that they're not going to judge whether a map is too partisan. And so now you have coded analysis of, who do they think is going to vote which way, and that all that science goes into drawing very carefully rigged maps. Any other topics you want to cover? All right, I want to thank everyone for coming, and thanks to my colleagues for making sure that we are standing strong on this issue, and we will not stop.